Welcome back, guys, to the JPS Education Portal Roundtable, and we are joined with Mackenzie Baker and Laurin Conlin. Welcome, guys.
Hey,
Welcome.
And guys, we are talking about fat loss this month, and obviously here in Australia, summer is around the corner, so plenty of people looking to get lean for the warmer months. Whereas, obviously, where Lauren's from in the States, America, as we call it, you guys are going into winter. So the summer shred is probably done and dusted for a lot of folk out your way. But nonetheless, we're going to discuss a few, very practical topics today. Ones that, if you're a coach, will definitely have benefit to your coaching of clients. And if you are a client, it will also help you to, have an understanding as to how these guys coach their clients. So, guys, let's start with some common struggles your fat loss clients may face. Laurin, let's kick it off with you. What are some of the most common issues that your clients struggle with?
So I would say that initially, a lot of people are thinking that when they're starting a diet, it's going to just like fall off the first week or two, right? And a lot of people have this perception or this misconception because, a lot of, trainers and coaches on social media are posting, oh, my clients lost 10 pounds in 10 days, and they're showing these insane transformations. And while there is a subset of individuals that might be able to lose really quickly early on, I actually find that it does take a few weeks to get things going. And this is just a common hurdle that I see a lot of clients deal with. Now, if you are a coach who took your client from a maintenance or surplus and then just totally bottomed them out, yes, you might see some more movement in the beginning, but typically most of us are not going to be doing that with clients. So part of it is just also finding like that true threshold of what is fat loss? Like what is a deficit? Because as we know, maintenance is a range. It's not just one number. So what seems like the upper end of maintenance, and then, oh, maybe I'm in a deficit, it might actually just be the lower end of your maintenance, and it might not be enough to stimulate fat loss. But the coach still doesn't want to bottom things out to start with, because that's not a smart strategy. So usually I would just say a big misconception or misunderstanding is that the first, week or two, you're going to lose 10 or 15 pounds. And I would say that that's usually quite the contrary, that it's going to be a little bit harder the first few weeks to actually find that threshold and that correct deficit. But then afterwards, things typically seem to get going.
And I guess when you are dealing with people who have that misconception, how do you reassure them that this is okay and that this is just a part of the process? Because I can imagine first-time clients, if the scale's not moving, they're going to be very frustrated. They're going to feel like they're failing or the diet's not working, potentially doubt you as the coach. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, it really just comes down to the conversation that we just had here. It's really just sharing, like, and being honest. Like, hey, I know that you probably thought that we might be dropping really, really quickly, but based on my experience, based on talking with other coaches, this is actually the norm. Like, you're doing nothing wrong. And it's often just about reassuring the client that they're on the right path. Most people are going to trust you. They just are maybe like unsure when things are starting to maybe not go how they thought. So it really just comes down to reassuring them like, hey, no, like you're doing all the right things, using the right language to be like, hey, you're checking the boxes, you're doing XYZ, highlighting all the positive things that they're doing, and then trying to shift their focus to maybe some other things they can focus on that week instead of just the scale, right? Hey, this week, let's really aim to do this or whatever it might be. It could be a small little task, nothing crazy, but like a little to do for them so that they do place their focus and their intention somewhere else. And then typically, like I said, within a few weeks, it does get the ball rolling. But I'm really big on honesty. And I think that just having those discussions with clients and not keeping them in the dark, like feeling like, oh no, what am I doing wrong as a coach? Like, hey, no, like this is a normal part of the process. You're not messing up, reassuring them, sorry, that they are doing a good job.
Awesome. Awesome. And Mac, as an anti-fat loss coach yourself, how do you approach dealing with these kind of issues that clients face?
well, I wouldn't say that I'm an anti-fat loss coach. Personally, for me, the biggest struggle I think clients seeking fat loss face is, well, actually all or nothing thinking. And the reason why I think that's the biggest struggle is because it impacts so many other areas of both their life and their fat loss efforts. It's kind of like, to me, I see it as the crux of a lot of issues. It's kind of the core of a lot of issues. The other thing I think people struggle with is going into a fat loss phase or endeavor and not actually thinking about how that's going to make their life better or even just impact their life, and not taking that into account when setting an expectation of fat loss, as well as thinking about what strategies are going to be appropriate and what rate and what level of intensity and how aggressive are you going to go. What's the degree of restriction, not just in terms of calories, but also impacts on or restraint that needs to be, I guess, applied to life overall. So yeah, all or nothing thinking and not thinking about the bigger picture, I think they're the core of why people struggle. And would you like me to go into how maybe I might navigate that with
Yeah,
clients?
for sure. Yep.
Okay. So all or nothing thinking is a tricky one because it can come in many different forms. Personally, I think it is a combination of, a big part of it is having good discussion. And if they've had instances in the past where they've faced a speed bump and what might be a small slip up, has that turned into a full blown, write off? Kind of going through, okay, how did that go for you? Run me through what the outcomes of that were. And now let's talk about what you might do differently next time. That in combination, so reflecting on previous instances where the what the hell effect has happened. And also a little bit of discussion around actually weight loss, fat loss, any nutrition goal in health is not a product of being perfect. We don't actually know what perfect really is. And I would argue that perfect is something that actually considers how you want to live your life, which inherently creates room, or it leaves inclusion of indulgences, social occasion, and flexibility. I mean, I see that as more of a perfect diet than someone as what might colloquially, did I pronounce that right? Colloquially, anyway, be viewed as the perfect diet. So, as I said, yeah, bit of discussion, asking those Socratic questions, bit of motivational interviewing, and then providing a little bit of education, and in terms of the impact of the goal on life enjoyment and everything, that's really, again, same thing. Motivation interviewing, asking questions. How will your life be different if you could click your fingers and achieve this goal? What would you be doing more of? What would you be doing less of? How would you be thinking, feeling differently? Have you considered the impact of these interventions? And going through this, and this is why I personally place so much importance on consultations as a coach.
Yeah, yeah. I think the all or nothing thinking is very common. And you're right, it does trip a lot of people up, especially when they're starting out in their fat loss journey, because if they do make a mistake, eat out, or they don't follow things quote unquote perfectly, it can lead to a lot of self-sabotage and yeah, hopping on and off the plan, which is detrimental. So do you want to give some examples of this all or nothing thinking, and then how you would, I guess, address those? Because I think that it's a very common issue that people face. And it can vary from person to person when it comes to how their binary perspective of their fat loss journey is viewed.
Yeah, so a million and one different ways all or nothing thinking can show itself in a fat loss or nutrition endeavor. For example, it might be I can't socialize because it's going to impact my goals, or if I do socialize, I've messed up, and now the whole weekend is a write-off, and they feel that diminishing self-efficacy, and they want to sort of give up and throw in the towel. Other examples would be just generally being rigid on really, I guess, precise expectations. Like, for example, I have to track everything I eat. I have to weigh everything I eat. And I have to hit my macro targets to the nearest plus or minus 3 grams. Now, I think that can be examples of all or nothing thinking. And the what the hell effect has actually been described in the literature. And this is not a direct quotation, but essentially a complete abandonment of nutrition goals upon any sort of disruption to food rules or food expectations. And in terms of, again, how you would navigate this, again, I think it's a big thing is reflection. So I'm also a huge fan of self-monitoring. The clients, filling in some kind of food thought journal. Not only is it a food log, but it's also what happened, why did it happen, and then going through any key moments throughout the week in a consultation call and reflecting upon them and saying, okay, what would you do differently next time? So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think there's so many things to unpack there, but I guess a lot of the self-monitoring that you mentioned then is somewhat qualitative, and I really like that from for addressing some of those more behavioral type issues that people might have, whether it's cognitive or more I guess actionable type behavior. But when it comes to the quantitative stuff in a fat loss diet, Laurin, how much importance do you place on tracking and measuring certain variables when we are trying to achieve fat loss, and maybe some of the different, I guess, categories of fat loss goals where more quantitative might be warranted than some other fat loss goals?
Yeah, it's a really great distinguisher, and I love that you said that because I think it really depends. Everything is dependent on the client's goals and what type of client they are. And I think oftentimes the messaging from people can be super dogmatic in terms of saying, "Hey, this is the optimal approach," and they're discussing a physique athlete when, the coach might be listening and they're only working with lifestyle clients, right? And then vice versa, right? So I think that we really need to be more specific when we're sharing messages like, "Hey, this is who this is intended for." So if you are any type of competitive athlete, whether that's a physique athlete or a performance athlete, and for most performance athletes, they would either need nutrition to fuel their performance and or could potentially be making weight, whether that's a weigh-in or they're just trying to drop. They might be doing a weigh-in where it's a transient weigh-in, like they're just doing that the week of, or they're doing they're making a weight class and they're trying to like gradually drop down. So I would say in those instances, it's much more important to focus on quantitative information because we have a strict deadline and we have strict protocols and targets that we need to hit, right? If you're getting on a bodybuilding stage, you need to be, 10% body fat as a female. We're going to need to have more quantitative measures because of that timeline and because of the strict rigidity and the extremeness of the sport. Same thing if you're a jujitsu athlete and you're trying to make weight for a new weight class, there's a little bit less wiggle room if you're competing for a championship in 3 months. If you're a lifestyle client, I think without really a hard timeline, even if you have a hard timeline, like let's say you're doing a photo shoot or you have an event, there's a lot more wiggle room in terms of qualitative information. So I think that it really comes down to first and foremost, who is your client and what is going to help them and their life. And I love what Max said about, how is this going to change your life? And for a competitive athlete, being more rigid in a sense in terms of having more quantitative measurements to follow and objectives, that's probably going to enhance their life because that's going to be towards their goal that they've expressed and that they're seeking to work towards, hopefully in a healthy, positive way. But it's a different discussion, right? For the lifestyle client, the actual number might not matter quite so much. So I would say that first and foremost, it really comes down to the type of client that you're working with, how extreme their goals are, what timeline are you working on, and then for that client, it might not even always be numbers. We could still have, oftentimes we hear numbers, we just think scale weight and macros. We could have maybe macro ranges depending on how far out someone is. We could be tracking habits. Something that I like to do is have these foundational habits that people can track because sometimes it's just nice to have. I'm a huge proponent of qualitative data, but sometimes it is just nice to be able to rank yourself on a 1 to 5 scale and to be able to look back on that over the week, right? So even if it is something that's a little bit more qualitative in nature, right, like hunger, you can still have a quantitative number placed on that. And sometimes, especially for people who are more numbers minded, that can be really beneficial. Every client is going to be a little bit different, right? I have some clients who are much more qualitative minded, and then there's other clients who are much more quantitative minded. So we have to also blend our methods depending on what is best for that client. And I might push someone towards if I want them to be focusing more on subjective, qualitative information, but they're a more quantitative, numbers-based person, I might focus more on, hey, let's rate this on a scale. And then alternatively, if someone, even if they have a strict goal, but they're more of a qualitative person, I will focus more on that and extract information from their check-ins based on that, and then apply any differences to the numbers that's necessary. So I think part of it is knowing your client as well, and then that way you can adjust the type of feedback that you're asking for and you're receiving.
Yeah, I really like that. I think you address two very important things. Obviously, the nature of the goal itself and what approach that's going to require, but the importance of like those individual differences. Like some people are a little bit more neurotic than others. They need to have control of the numbers. They need to know exactly what's going in, exactly what's going out, and they actually enjoy that because that's how their brain operates. And I think trying to get somebody who operates like that to just, portion sizes, like, size of your palm, or how much of my palm, is it the whole palm? Is it, an inch above my palm? Like, what do you mean? They'll have conniption if you don't give them specific instructions. So Mac, on the other end of the spectrum, how how much can you get away with, I guess, in terms of not having a tracking approach in your experience, where you're focusing on the quantitative stuff? Like, how much of an impact can the more qualitative, I guess, approach have on a fat loss phase? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who just wouldn't buy into the idea that they can lose a serious amount of weight or fat by just making changes to their portions and tracking things a little bit less quantitatively. So what's your experience there, and how would you get someone over the line to have a more qualitative approach as opposed to tracking the numbers?
Oh, wow. Yeah, a bit to unpack there. But first, I'll just echo what Laurin said there about how it's an issue where physique athletes are talking about their approach, and then people who are their audience who aren't interested in competing are thinking, oh, well, that's what I have to do to achieve fat loss. And I've actually had people reach out to me who said, I didn't know that there was a such thing as nutrition coaching that didn't involve either macros or a meal plan. And I see that as a problem in the communication space, that actually there are other ways, and these people require a lot of objectivity. A physique athlete, you're going to have a crap ton of objectivity in there. It's not going to work if you're doing the sort of approaches that you alluded or mentioned there, Jacob. Now, you can get, it depends on this. Obviously, it depends on the situation. In terms of how much fat loss you can get with a more qualitative approach, less metrics, less objectivity. It really is going to depend on the situation. But the reason why I tend to lean towards it in most client settings is because it has more long-term applicability. If you are working on your sensitivity to your hunger and fullness cues, and you are building the confidence that you can eat with them in mind, and you're working on food legalization, in the long term, this is going to better position you to be able to eat in a conscious manner, a more health-seeking manner, and make more conscious food decisions, as well as be more aware of what your stopping point is when you're eating a meal. So I think in the long term, actually might be more effective, because a macro tracking approach is sort of like a phase. It doesn't sort of give you necessarily all of the tools you need. It will help you learn stuff, but it doesn't give you all the tools you need to be able to eat in a conscious, health-seeking way for life. So I would almost argue that in many ways, the subjective, like less quantitative approach might be more effective in the long run. Now, again,
the anti-fat loss stuff.
No, it's not anti-fat loss. It's more about health, like eating in a conscious, health-seeking manner, and then the fat loss, the weight management kind of takes care of itself. Because when we think about the diet that will put someone within, say, the desirable body weight or BMI range, it's going to be a diet that is high in fruit and vegetables. They're going to be connected to their internal hunger and fullness cues. They're going to have confidence that they can hit that stopping point and enjoy social occasions, but not turn it into a full-blown, write-off fest. So if someone was resistant to that, you have to tread that line of giving them what they want versus what they need. Now, if someone was like, just put me in, coach, and they're like not a physique athlete, they're not a weight cut athlete or anything like that, they're just like a punter, and they're like, put me in, coach. And as a coach that maybe like in the long run, you've said that you have issues with overeating and all or nothing thinking, that maybe they need to work on things like, building up confidence and trust in their ability to eat based on internal cues, blah, blah, blah. But you want to also give them what they want. Now, inevitably, giving them what they want might not work out too well. And then maybe 6, 8 weeks down the line, you ask them, hey, how's that going for you? And they go, yeah, didn't go that well. I haven't really had much consistency. And then at that point, they might be more open to listening to what your ideas are. But you've respected their autonomy whilst by providing them with the approach, or guiding them rather, through the approach in a safe manner that they want to do.
And I just want to add to that. I think,
Lauren, if you want to add to that, you just unmute yourself.
oh, am I muted?
Now we can hear you. Perfect.
Oh, okay. Maybe it broke up. I was like, wait, did I? My voice is a little, I was just at an event speaking, so my voice is a little bit hoarse, so maybe it just kind of cut out. So one thing that I think when we're having this discussion also is, so say somebody has been tracking macros, or they've found a lot of benefits from it. And I touched on this actually at our presentation at the event, the UBC. I look at this as a continuum, right? So I really like to focus on foundational habits first, then thinking about tracking metrics, macros, and then you can apply more of an intuitive approach. And in my mind, the idea of this continuum is that it is really a sliding scale, so that it's not necessarily like 1, 2, 3. We're able to go up and down as needed based on what the client does need. So if somebody is listening and they are tracking macros, or if you are coaching clients who predominantly are using macros as the metric, this, after a period of time, you can certainly go to these other approaches like Mac is talking about with a lot of success, because now you've had this kind of foundation in terms of the tracking. So just because someone is tracking right now doesn't mean that they can't apply what Mac is talking about. I think that that's kind of that next step. But for a lot of people, using the tracking portion is really helpful for them to take that next step successfully. Not for everybody, but I do think that for a lot of people, it gives them, even if it's 3 to 6 months, right? They can really have like a launching pad for them to have more success in the long run. But as always, it's about how are you using the tracking, right? You can be a very conscious macro tracker, or you can be a very unconscious macro tracker. You can lose sight of your hunger and your satiety signals, or you don't have to. So I think that it all comes down to that intentionality and that reflection that the client has. And also going back to what does that client need right now? Are they a more numbers-based person? Are they not? So I think that no matter what approach that you take, what is most important from what everybody here is saying is that there is a deep intentionality and a reflection and a understanding of what you're doing on a deeper level, and not just let me weigh this and not even look at it and have no idea how much 4 ounces of chicken is. If you've weighed 4 ounces of chicken several times, you're going to know how much it is if you're paying attention. So don't let the numbers or the scale weight supersede what your eyes are showing you, or what your satiety signals are showing you. But I think all these things can be true at once. Ultimately, we just have to be more reflective and help coach clients be more reflective in that process.
I really like that. I think it's critical to understand that the application of an approach determines, I guess, the outcome or what happens with that approach, right? It's like you can mindlessly track, or you could track calories and macros and be on your phone on MyFitnessPal hours every day, playing macro Tetris, and that's going to absolutely drain your, cognitive resources and be an absolute nightmare for you. You're going to hate it, and it's probably not going to work. Or you could plan your food out in advance, work out your portion sizes, take note of what they actually look like, what it feels like, and then not track for the rest of the week, for example. So I think there's, very important points to make there. It's how you apply the approach, which is critical. And yeah, something I wanted to talk to you guys about was, once a client has begun their fat loss phase, obviously there comes a point where you need to make an adjustment to keep the fat loss coming, because they're going to reach new maintenance. There's no longer going to be fat loss. So Laurin, what are some of the, I guess, criteria or the checklist prerequisites, whatever you like to call it, for you to adjust someone's calories or expenditure, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so oftentimes if somebody is stalled out that week, I'm not going to be like, whoa, better drop the hammer, right? Like, we got to go. Now, again, context, if someone is making weight for a competition in a few weeks, or someone is a physique athlete getting on stage with a shorter timeline, we have to be realistic, right? I'm all about like, let's take our time and let's go really slow and go with the flow. But at some point, for certain athletes, you can't do that. for a lifestyle client, which is going to be for most people who are either listening to the call or coaching those types of clients, generally speaking, I would, if it's 1 week of no movement, I'm not really going to be too concerned. After a second week, then it's going to be okay, like, let's look into some of these factors, right? Because most people can plus or minus a scale weight of a few pounds or a kilo or so pretty easily. Now, if you've worked with a client for a long time, you will generally know their their fluctuations, right? Like, I have some clients who, despite their best efforts, they fluctuate a lot more than others. And some people really just don't fluctuate much at all. And this is especially true if a client I found has been overweight. And oftentimes, potentially, they've either been overweight and now they're at a reduced weight, or they still have like a lot of loose skin. I just often find that those clients typically fluctuate more. And then certain clients, certain female clients who do experience a lot of weight fluctuations around their cycle. Some don't, some do. So it's going to be, coming down to like, all right, let's put all the pieces together. Where are you if you're female in your cycle? Did you have any big changes this week in terms of, electrolyte balance? Did you have a lot more sodium or a lot less? Did you have a lot more water or a lot less? How is your regularity in your digestion? Were you sleeping this week? Did you list out 18 stressors in your check-in and then go, I don't know why I wasn't making any progress this week? It's like, hey, like, let's check this out. And oftentimes it's usually not just one of those, because every system is, going to feed off of each other. So generally speaking, there's going to be a few of those points that are going to be off. Of course, the obvious is, was somebody adherent to their diet, whatever that plan might look like to them. And adherence doesn't necessarily just mean zeroing out their macros, but adherence to whatever protocol that you guys have created. So that's like, of course, that's number one, right? Has someone been adherent first and foremost? If they have, then we go to the next tier of, let's look at everything else. And after a week or two of that, then we can say, all right, maybe it's time to make an adjustment. Low hanging fruit is if somebody is either not very active during the day, or they aren't really doing a lot of additional expenditure, is to add in either some additional steady state or just additional steps and activity to their plan. I'm not a fan of someone who, like, I'm not just gonna like jack up someone's cardio out of nowhere, right? And make it unmanageable, especially for a lifestyle client. But most people are very, very sedentary during the day. Most people work desk jobs and they're getting virtually no steps. And I'm like, if you are a relatively normal weight individual with a probably a, more metabolically adapted metabolism after years of dieting, and you are moving 3,000 steps a day, we're just not going to be able to eat thousands and thousands of calories and lose body fat, right? Like, that's again another conversation of like, what are these realities here? So I would say that generally speaking, if someone is on the low end of that, we're going to increase that. And then if it is time for a diet adjustment, it would primarily come from carbohydrates and a little bit of fats. I'm not really going to change protein until someone is very body weight reduced to where now their protein intake is like really mismatched from, where they started their diet to the end. And again, that's going to typically be someone who is maybe a physique athlete who's lost a significant amount of weight. But generally for most lifestyle clients, they're already struggling to eat enough protein, so probably not going to adjust that. And then lastly, this is a very qualitative aspect, but for my more advanced clients who we've done this work to get more in tune with their bodies and themselves, I will ask them like, hey, do you feel like you're going to drop, or do you feel like it's time to make an adjustment? And the clients who know that feeling can share that with me really easily. Typically, again, this is going to be a more advanced client or someone who's been practicing this for quite some time. Like, I know, like, if I'm being honest with myself, if I'm in a fat loss phase, like, I know when it's time to make an adjustment just based on how I feel. But that's a skill that has to be developed over time. So for those clients, I will also ask that, hey, be honest with me. Are you feeling like we're going to drop? Or do we need to make a push? And lastly, if I'm kind of on the edge with someone in terms of like, should we make an adjustment? Should we not? I will usually have them send in some kind of secondary, just like touch point. I do once weekly check-ins. So as a frame of reference. So I'll have someone, hey, in the next 3 to 4 days, send me weight and photos and we'll make adjustments. Again, this is going to be for a competitive client. But that's also another strategy for people if they're kind of on the fence about, I'm not really sure if I should make this change. And then you can do that and make some adjustments. Hey, your sleep has been trash all week and you haven't drank any water. Let's fix those things and then reach out to me, at the end of the week, and we can maybe make an adjustment if you haven't had any movements. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but wanted to cover all the things.
You certainly covered all of it, and it aligns pretty closely with like my approach as well, which is first address adherence. Like you have to determine whether or not the stall is a perceived stall or an actual stall, right? So a perceived stall would be if adherence has been low, if there might be inaccurate measurements. So like the timing of scale weight measurements, like technique errors, if they're, taking progress photos, whatever it is. And then the third is like confounding variables, as you said. So, fluctuations in scale weight due to water intake, activity level, sleep, stress, all those kind of things. And then once you sort of tease those out, it's like, okay, we're in an actual stall. Then it's like, okay, cool. Do we have room to make an adjustment? Is that something that we need to do? And so forth. So I really like the approach that you outlined there. So Mac, with your approach being something that is typically going to be more long-term behavior focused, how would you make an adjustment to somebody's nutrition when it's not necessarily tracking calories and macros in a more quantitative approach? What's the go there? How do you do that?
Yeah, so someone's, trying to progress towards a goal and then they stop achieving that goal. I instantly add 2,000 steps, reduce calories instantly by 10%, tell them they don't want it bad enough. And if that happens for another week, I bench them, but
Yeah.
they keep paying. Just
Yeah.
kidding. So I'll echo again what you said, Lauren. It depends on the situation. Do we need to be proactive or can we be a little bit more reactive? Can we wait a little bit? If we have a time restricted goal, it's sort of like we might need to troubleshoot and make an adjustment now rather than just kind of give yourselves a bit more time, see if that weight loss whoosh kind of comes that we expect. If we have seen a plateau, first thing is to determine, again, is it an actual plateau? If it is an actual plateau, then we go and troubleshoot why. Now, that's when we might differ depending on whether the goal is high level and they're using a lot of objectivity and numbers and data versus sort of like more of that, what you said, Jacob, the longer term style thing. And now what I will say is that with, I guess, how you would call them lifestyle clients or more like long-term general health weight management style clients, usually the reason why they're not dropping is very, very obvious, very, very quickly. I went on holidays and XYZ happened. I had a tough week at work and I had more after dinner. Certain menstrual cycle factors. So it could also be not adherence. It could be other factors that we need to consider. I had terrible sleep all week, blah, 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 blah. Now, at that point, it becomes the question of, do we make adjustments? Do we make changes? Or do we just slide back into previous expectations or routine and wait? And, the pros and cons to each will be discussed. But if it is a case of, no, we need to make a change, then it's sort of like, okay, well, firstly, what is the problem? Why did it happen? Can we deal with that problem? Can we eliminate that problem from the picture? If the answer is no, we actually can't eliminate the problem, then we look at things like plan Bs, we look at next best feasible option, or BFOs, as I like to call them. Or if it's something like emotional eating, for example, or eating due to boredom or stress, we might look at a non-food coping mechanism. So people use food as a coping strategy to a lot of negative feelings, emotions that they experience. Is there something else that can solve the same problem without having the side effect on impacting the goal in mind? So it would sort of be, again, collaboration, discussion, unpacking the what happened, what can we do about it, etc., etc., etc. Now, I wanted to just, be a bit of a go off on a tangent person here, and I apologize. Now, before we mentioned, or there was discussion around if someone's, done tracking for a while, they're going to be able to eyeball, like, that's 150 grams of chicken, or like they're going to have that baseline knowledge. And I would agree with that. They're going to be able to build meals. They're going to know rough appropriate portion sizes and whether the calories are appropriate for that. However, there is also an argument, and I'm not too sure. I want to preface this by saying I'm not too sure what side of the fence that I sit on, and it's probably more of a case by case basis. But there is also a strong argument that a period of macro tracking or using external metrics to regulate food intake actually impairs your ability to eat with internal regulation or intuitive eating or eating competence in the long run, because it is causing you to not use your internal cues, not think about them, and also override them. And that is the argument. And this is the thing I see a lot of people say, oh, I can eat without tracking, which they call intuitive eating, which is not what intuitive eating actually is. It's more than that. They say, the reason why I can intuitively eat, and remember, I'm not the real definition, the Insta definition, is because I tracked macros for 4 years. Now, that is potentially incorrect, because there's no part of intuitive eating that says draw back on previous experiencing macro tracking where you looked at 150 grams of chicken and you put it on a scale. Like, you're not referring to that past experience. That's not what intuitive eating is. So I just wanted to throw that little one in there as a little bit of a controversial point. And again, I'm not sure what side of the fence I sit on. I think it's both. I think there's pros and cons to each. But all I'm saying is that there is an argument against the idea of a phase of tracking promoting long-term internal regulation.
Gotcha. So you've just thrown a spanner in the works. I had this nice flow of where the conversation was going to go, and now you've thrown
fucked it.
You have fucked it. But every time you do this, you just look like Dr. Evil more and more.
I am Dr. Evil.
I don't know if you guys have seen Austin Power Fire the Laser.
Bro, I used to have the triple box set. All right.
Right. So did I. I'm glad
DVD.
we're on the same page there. Okay, cool. So, Mac, it sounds like we'll get back to those points potentially on a separate podcast, because they are very interesting but warrant a separate discussion. So, when it comes to addressing some of the issues that you were talking about, it seems like that was an adherence related issue, like a more non-persisting, not following the plan consistently, with some emotional eating, potentially social pressures, influencing their calorie intake, and that's what you're navigating there. But let's say somebody has done everything you've said, and they haven't had that emotional eating or social pressures. I guess what you were trying to say there is you're trying to identify the pockets where calorie intake might be higher or beyond what is appropriate for their goal. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right, mate.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Well, when it comes to adherence issues, I guess this is one that you started to touch on there. Laurin, will come to you. How do you address adherence issues? And I guess it's important to identify that adherence and misreporting, there's different types of issues related to that. You could have somebody who doesn't really start the plan, people who misreport and maybe fudge the numbers, or maybe they're intentionally telling you little lies or whatever it is because they don't want to let you down or to feel bad, whatever the case is, or they might just be inconsistent with their execution of the plan. So do you want to maybe discuss some of the common, I guess, themes around misreporting and adherence issues and why they're important to address?
Yeah, so I would say that it really comes down to the client's experience level. And this is not an always, right? Like, sometimes clients who have more experience can still have adherence issues or reporting issues, right? I just had a client who's been a physique athlete for years. She's been pretty on top of her stuff for quite some time. And I don't know, do you guys use liquid, but butter spray over there? Like it's like butter, but in the States it's called, I can't believe it's not butter, and it's like a spray, and it's marketed as 0 calories or virtually no calories, right? If you do like it's like a 0.6 second spray, which is like nothing, right? And she was, in my wildest dreams, I would never imagine that someone would use more than a few sprays of that, because first of all, I think that would be repulsive. But second of all, like, why would you just be using so much of this? Anyways, my client, calling her fake ass Pauladine, no, she was using quite a bit of it, not because her numbers were so low, but because she just genuinely likes it. And she was like, hey, I have something to share with you. And I was like, what? She's like, I've been using probably close to 200 calories of fake butter spray. And I was like, excuse me? Like, what? She's like, I had no idea. Like, it's listed as, virtually a no-calorie food, but then when you actually look at it, you know, and you figure out how much you're using, and I was like, oh my goodness. So sometimes things like that are so extreme that are revealed over time. Generally speaking, that's not the issue that your client might be having. But oftentimes it comes back to, again, regardless of someone's, you know, experience or their goal, it comes down to asking enough questions on a weekly basis. So that's why I'm so big on, in terms of the coach, making sure that your weekly check-ins are asking adequate questions. Because if you're asking adequate questions, you're going to be able to get a full picture of what the client is potentially experiencing. And then from there, you'll be able to troubleshoot, because then you can kind of weave different things together and paint this bigger picture. So ultimately, that's how you're going to find often the adherence problems, whether that is a, you know, mistracking or a misnumbering, or to your point, not like, sometimes people don't wanna tell you, right? But if you're asking the right questions, you can kind of read between the lines and see a difference in the way that they're communicating, and it's a very small perceptive shift, but that is a time where you could be like, you know, in a gentle and open way, like, "Hey, you know, I've noticed, you know, maybe you've, you know, talked about this for a few weeks, or your tone has changed here, something going on," you know, and then you can kind of start to ask more questions, and then people will open up to you. Just like some clients, like, everyone's going to be different in terms of qualitative versus quantitative. There are some clients we all know who will tell us every single thing that happens in their life, but then there's other clients who we are at the mercy of what they're sharing with us, right? Like, they could be living, you know, for lack of a better term, like two separate lives. You know, they could be living like their certain life and then the life that they're sharing with us. And ultimately, like, we're at the mercy of what they're sharing. So all we can do is set them up for success by, you know, asking the right questions, being very open and honest with our communication, and, you know, creating that space where they feel like they can share with us. And I think that that's really important. So regardless of like where the client's at in terms of experience or what their goal is, that's going to be how you're going to navigate any of the adherence issues. And the other thing that this, why asking the right questions is so important, and Mac talked about this earlier, but reflection, I just really want to hammer home on this. Reflecting is so important, because you could, you know, lack of adherence is like a really general basic thing, right? There's 1,500 ways that somebody could be non-adherent, and we could maybe have our rough idea, right? I could probably nail down 80, 90% of someone's story, but I don't know what that other 10% might be. So by them reflecting on it and then getting back to me and sharing maybe where those issues were, you know, I had a client who is pretty on track most of the time, again, in terms of what our metrics are. And then he reported not being on track for on his terms, right? And I was like, listen, like, you know, this is obviously not this is not your norm. I want you to take, while it's fresh, in the next few days, I want you to sit down and reflect on, you know, what happened in this situation. And he was able to send back a really great synopsis and a summary in terms of like, here's what happened, here's how I felt, this is what I want to do about it, et cetera, et cetera. I would have known kind of, I would have gotten pretty close, but that last, you know, 5 or 10% of the story is what's really going to allow us to make those changes, because they're specific to that client. So I don't really have any direct, you know, measures, but those are like kind of the hierarchy and overall themes that you can use for literally every client when we're discussing an adherence issue.
Yeah, I think it's just always a good idea as a coach to try and get to the point where you can visualize or even list like what happens day by day in a client's life, and like where they're at, what they're doing. And if you can get to that point, obviously through asking good questions or having them be able to share enough information with you, you can start to really tease out like where the issues lie. So I like that approach. Mac, what about you?
Yeah, I love that. One thing that you mentioned there, Lauren, was create the safe. I can't remember the words exactly, but it was something like where you've created the safe space to have those discussions. And I think that highlights why tough love coaching is not effective, because if someone feels safe to be honest with you, like it's a non-judgmental thing, you're there to help them, you're meant to meet them where they're at and work with them rather than put them down. You know, people will like, if people have sort of slipped up, if they feel shame, they're less likely to tell you that, or they might stop checking in, they might not reply, and then that's when they slowly fade away, and then you never hear from them again. So I think, yeah, creating that safe space is absolutely paramount. What do you reckon, Jacob?
I agree, but I just want to work with winners, man. Like if you're not a winner and you're not losing, 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week,
You're dropped.
I don't want to know you. You can go work with another coach, anti-fat loss Mac.
I would
No,
say just those numbers oftentimes again, and we've touched on this. There are some clients that are just really quantitative and I want to support that, right? And of course anything can be taken to an extreme and taken to a decrement, and create issues. However, I don't think that people being quantitatively minded is necessarily a negative thing because there's still ways we can quantitatively measure subjective progress or subjective ratings. But we already touched on that. But I do want to say to that point that the kind of the joke of like the 0.5 to 1%, whatever it was, that still is very common and that messaging is very common. So clients are thinking that like, hey, how quickly am I going to lose? What's our goal weight? What's this? What's that? Unless you're a weight cut athlete where we got to be, you
uh-huh.
know, 60 kilos on the dot, it doesn't matter, and I had a consult call with a client who was very overweight and he had good intentions and there was a lot of great things, but he was asking just normal questions because he just truly doesn't know kind of where to start. And he was like, well, what should my goal weight be? I see people who are my height who range from 200 pounds to 260 pounds who I like their physiques. And I was like, exactly, because there's always different structures, different muscle mass, different all these different things. And I was like, I would be lying if I told you what your goal weight should be right now. I go, that's not really relevant. We've never worked together. I don't know what your body's going to look like in 10 pounds or in 50 pounds. You need to lose weight for health reasons because you're in a not, safe place right now in terms of some of the issues that you're dealing with. So you do need to lose weight and body fat for your health. But the number and how much that's going to improve, I would be lying if I said that. So just in general for the coaches listening, like we again have to just have this open discussion with clients like, hey, it's not necessarily about this amount because you might lose 0% one week and then 2% then or whatever it might be, right? Like it's not always a linear thing. And sometimes we can make an adjustment and people make no progress. Sometimes you make an adjustment and you make more progress than you expected. So it's never just like like that would be great. And I've worked with maybe a handful of people who it's kind of like every week we're bang on with a new drop, but I would say that that's like the 0.1% of clients.
I totally agree. I think for most people, it's good to have some kind of short-term and long-term goal. I think people need something to aim for. Otherwise, it can be a very, non-fulfilling process if there's no sense of direction. Like, where are we going? Like, most people need some direction, or at least something to aim for. And that doesn't always have to be scale weight loss. But I think in most cases, in the context of fat loss, like a scale weight loss is what is going to, give us direction, right? But I think more importantly, what I try to focus on with most of my clients is, cool, we want to lose this amount of weight. This is our goal weight. We need to lose X amount of weight per week to get there. It's not always going to be like that. But if we get really good at these things, that's going to drive you there. So instead of putting the cart before the horse, I like to focus on, learning how to freaking ride that horse and do all the things within the fat loss phase, all the behavior stuff, like really, really good. And I think that can negate some of these, I guess, binary issues around, should we aim to lose a certain amount of weight per week or should we have a goal weight? It's like, it's not an either or situation. Like, it's always case by case. Some clients, I literally say, I don't care. I don't want you to weigh yourself. We're not going to focus on that. I want you to get really good at these things. And that's
Yeah.
fantastic for some people. For other people, if you just told them that, hey, we're not going to worry about scale weight, we're not going to try to lose fat, they will go find another coach. And that's the reality of it. Some people, like it, we can have all these great intentions around not wanting to do harm by our clients, and we don't want to fuck them up by, making them track calories and macros. But at the end of the day, your ability to help people is influenced by not only what you do, but how long you're able to work with someone. And I think it's really important to, like Max said earlier, be willing to give them a little bit what they want as well as what they need. And in most cases, what they want is that fat loss goal. They want to see the scale weight go down. And if you just take away what they want, like, they're going to be very displeased with your coaching service. So you need to give them that, but then give them what they need, which is usually eating related competencies. And there's different competencies that apply to fat loss phases, as Laurin has mentioned in her continuum. And I think that's what we really need to double down on. It's like, if you do all these, you will enhance your opportunity or the likelihood that you're going to lose your target rate of loss each week and reach your goal. But if you're focusing on getting so, good at doing all the behaviors within the, constraints of the phase, like, that's way more rewarding than the outcome. And hopefully you can shift their, I guess, perspective of what success looks like over time. But yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. Mac, I'm sure you've got a few things you want to add there.
Yeah. So a bit of opening a can. I feel like the can of
Yeah.
the process goals versus the outcome goal thing was just, we got the fork, the knife, and we're just kind of opening the can there. So I just want to open a little bit more.
Let those worms fly,
So
brother.
so yeah, I think it's important that people have, like more of that. The weight goal can be sometimes very helpful depending on the person and what they want. Again, you often have to give them that because they're going to go to macro coach Steve down the road at Anytime Fitness who's going to be like, cuz, this is what you need. 1,500 calories, don't worry about it. You don't want that shit. So you can actually, though, create a source of progress assessment in terms of habit building. So, how many green lights were you for consuming fruit in your breakfast across this past week? And you can compare that from the week before. And that can be a way of assessing progress that is independent to how much weight did you lose and how far away from your end goal of body weight loss are you actually. The good thing about this is it creates a more frequent opportunity to celebrate a milestone or a win. And when we have more frequent opportunities to feel like we are progressing, more so than when the goal's so far out of reach because you've still got another 20 kilos to lose, you're going to feel more confident in your abilities. That, in other words, your self-efficacy is going to be enhanced. And when we feel confident in our abilities to do something, when we feel good at something, we're probably going to be more motivated to do it. So I think it's important to try and inject as much of that into an approach as possible within someone's tolerance and someone's willingness to actually consider those things. But I think if you can emphasize that and place a minimum effective level of emphasis on the more outcome stuff, the body weight stuff, the appearance-based stuff, you are A, reducing risk, you are B, moving someone away from all or nothing thinking, C, promoting their self-efficacy and their level of confidence.
Was that A, B, C?
I think I said 159 or something.
Pretty spot on.
Sorry,
Yeah.
probably
Mac,
skipped one.
I
You
think
guys have no excuse. It's morning over there, so you should be firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
True. Mac, I totally agree with what you said. I think that echoes a lot of my approach as well. Laurin, is there anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, I think I just really wanted to add that one point. I think this is a fantastic discussion, and it kind of just sounds like we need a part two or a continuation rather
Yeah,
than maybe a part two.
yeah, part two for sure. I think Mac's got plenty to say. Those anti-fat loss brain cells of yours they're jiving.
I'm not
Those
anti-fat
gu
loss.
those gurus, they're just, no, this
I
was
know
this was
you're
great. I
not
love
anti-fat loss. I love that Mac actually thinks that I think he's anti-fat loss. I love that. I know you're not anti-fat loss, but your incessant justification of not being anti-fat loss shows me that you don't know that. I love it.
Yeah, fair
That's
enough.
all we've got for this month's episode. I'm sure that you guys took plenty away from this. Thank you both for your insights, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you for having us
Amazing.
on.
Thank you.